I knew something was wrong the second the lock didn't click. My fingers hesitated over the keypad, double-checked the numbers I'd memorized years ago. 1980 heart. The year Lucas was born. The code I'd used every day for the last 6 years. I pressed it again, slower this time. The little screen blinked red, an ugly, sharp color I'd never seen before. Then the voice, flat, synthetic, unfriendly. Access denied. I actually laughed at first. A short, nervous laugh that sounded too loud on the quiet porch. Oh, come on, I muttered, trying again. Beep, 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 beep. Access denied. The air shifted. Something cold tightened in my chest. I bent closer, squinting at the screen. Too many failed attempts. Contact administrator. Administrator. That was supposed to be me. My thumb hovered over the doorbell. Maybe it was just a glitch. Maybe Marissa had updated the lock and forgot to tell me. Maybe. I pressed the bell and waited, suitcase by my side. No sound of footsteps, no voices, just the faint hum of the refrigerator through the wall. I rang again, and then I heard movement inside, the creak of the floorboard near the hallway. Someone was there. I felt my mouth go dry. I knocked softly. Lucas, it's me. My voice sounded smaller than I intended. I tried the bell again. Silence. I stepped back and looked through the living room window. The curtains were closed, my curtains the ones with the little blue trim I picked up at a flea market years ago. Behind them, faint shadows shifted slow enough that I knew they were deliberately keeping quiet. I pulled out my phone and called Lucas. Straight to voicemail. I tried Marissa. Same thing. I stood there on my own porch, dressed in my pale pink cardigan and slacks the ones I wore for errands, and suddenly felt like a stranger in a place that was supposed to belong to me. The hedges I'd trimmed myself every Sunday. The bird bath in the yard Lucas built for me one Mother's Day, back when he still cared about things like that. Even the welcome mat, a silly thing that said, home, is where the heart is, felt like it was mocking me. My phone buzzed. A text from Lucas. In a meeting. We'll call you later. A meeting. At 3:45 on a Thursday, I typed back quickly. The door code isn't working. I'm outside. What's going on? The dots appeared. Then vanished. No reply. The street was quiet. A couple of cars under the elm trees. Across the way, Mr. Hanley was unloading groceries from his truck. He glanced at me but didn't wave like he normally does, just disappeared inside. I looked at my car in the driveway. I'd just come from an overnight trip to help Claire with her doctor's appointment. I expected to be home by lunch. It was now almost 4. I tried the keypad one more time. The lock blinked red like a warning. System locked. Please contact administrator. I set the suitcase down. My knees felt weak. I sat on the porch step and stared at the door. The same door I'd painted myself last spring. Marissa wanted it a neutral beige. I insisted on soft yellow, said it looked warmer. Now it just looked empty. The sun was dipping lower, casting long shadows on the yard. My phone battery was at 18%. I thought about going to a diner, sitting in a booth with a stale cup of coffee while waiting for someone to call me back. But the idea of explaining to a stranger that I was locked out of my own house, it made my stomach twist. I leaned back against the porch railing and closed my eyes for a moment. I thought about the last 2 months. Lucas had been staying here temporarily after losing his job. Marissa moved in too, along with their oversized dog that tore up my flower beds. I didn't complain. I made room, cleared out the guest room, cooked extra meals, paid for new groceries because they were on a tight budget. I thought I was helping. The quiet inside the house felt loud, deafening. I tried to call again. Left a voicemail this time. Lucas, I don't know what's going on, but I'm locked out. Please call me. Nothing. A memory flashed in my mind, Lucas, as a boy sitting on this very step holding a scraped knee. Back then, I'd always known how to fix his pain. A band-aid, a hug, a little promise that everything would be okay. Now I wasn't sure I could fix any of this. A car drove by slowly, the driver glancing curiously before moving on. I straightened my back out of habit, pretending I wasn't stranded like a fool on my own porch. My phone pinged again. Another text. This time from Marissa. It's not a good time, Evelyn. Please respect our space. We'll talk later. Our space. My breath caught. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a glitch. I sat there until the sun slipped behind the roofs. No one opened the door. By the time the streetlights flickered on, I'd made my choice. I wasn't going to sit on the porch all night like an unwelcome guest. I wasn't going to give the neighbors another thing to whisper about. I pulled my suitcase back to the car. I didn't cry. Not yet. There's a kind of shock that's too sharp for tears. It just hollows you out. I slid into the driver's seat and stared at the glowing windows of the house for one last moment. My house. My name on the deed. Then I started the engine and drove toward the only person I could think of who might still open their door for me. I drove without thinking, just following the empty streets until I ended up on Claire Evans' block. I hadn't been there in months, not since her knee surgery. Claire was my old friend from the hospital. Tough as nails, always the one who told the truth, even when it stung. If anyone would open the door at this hour without asking a million questions, it was her. It was nearly 6 when I knocked. She answered in a bathrobe curlers in her silver hair eyes, squinting like she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Evelyn, hi, I managed. My voice cracked. I'm sorry it's late. I need a favor. She didn't ask, just stepped aside. Come in, honey. You look like hell. Inside, everything smelled like lavender and old books. Familiar. Safe. I stood there for a moment, holding my suitcase like it might keep me upright. Claire shuffled into the kitchen, muttering something about tea and toast. Sit, she called over her shoulder. You're pale as paper. I sank into a chair. My hands were still shaking, not from age, but from something deeper, shock, humiliation. The house key in my purse suddenly felt useless, like a relic from a life I no longer had. Claire came back with a steaming mug, set it in front of me, then leaned against the counter with her arms crossed. Now, tell me. I stared at the tea for a long time before the words came. They locked me out. Lucas and Marissa. Her eyebrows shot up. Locked you out, like... The door. Yes, the smart lock. It said, access denied. My voice wavered on those words. They were inside Claire. I heard them. But they didn't open it. Didn't answer the bell. Claire's face hardened. Oh, those two. I never liked that Marissa. Always thought she had ice in her veins. I shook my head more at myself than at her. I thought maybe it was a mistake. I texted Lucas. He just said they were in a meeting. Then she texted, respect our space. Our space, Claire. My house. The silence stretched. I felt it settle heavy in my chest. Finally, she sighed. Do you want my advice, or do you want me to just be mad with you? I almost laughed a brittle sound. Both. She sat across from me, folding her hands like she was about to deliver bad news to a patient. Honey, you've been too soft on that boy. I told you years ago, after that business with his first wife, you give him an inch, he'll take your living room. I thought I was helping. Claire tilted her head. Helping is when you lift someone up. This is them stepping on you. I stared down at my tea. The steam was fading. After a long pause, I said I need to call the bank. Claire didn't ask why. She just got up and fetched her cordless phone like it was the most natural thing in the world. When I gave the banker my name, there was a slight hesitation on the other end. "Yes, Mrs. Hart," the woman said, polite, but careful. "I see recent updates to your account. A secondary user accessed it yesterday." My stomach dropped. What updates? Household permissions were modified. A joint control tag was added for Lucas Hart. Also, there's a note regarding the power of attorney document on file. It was reaffirmed electronically. My throat tightened. "I didn't authorize that." "I understand. Would you like me to place a temporary freeze on all transactions until we verify?" "Yes," I whispered. "Do it now." When I hung up, Claire was watching me with the kind of look that says, "I want to hug you, but also shake some sense into you." "They touched your accounts, didn't they?" she said quietly. I nodded. "They used the POA I signed after my gallbladder surgery, said it was just to help with errands while I recovered." Claire's jaw set. "So they planned this." I wanted to say no. I wanted to believe it was a misunderstanding, some horrible mix-up. But deep down, I knew better. The silence, the texts, the way Lucas had been avoiding eye contact lately, it all lined up. Claire slid a plate of toast toward me. "Eat something. Then we call someone who actually knows how to fix this." I picked up the toast, but my hands wouldn't stop trembling. I can't believe he'd do this. My own son. Claire didn't sugarcoat it. "Sweetheart, some kids see their parents as people. Others just see a safety net. You've been holding that net his whole life." I blinked hard. There were no tears yet, just a heavy ache pressing behind my eyes. After the tea, I borrowed Claire's phone charger, plugged in my dead cell, and stared at the screen. No calls. No apologies. Just the quiet confirmation that they'd chosen this. When I finally lay down on her couch that night, I didn't sleep. My mind kept replaying the sound of the door lock, denying me the echo of my own voice on the porch. But somewhere beneath the hurt, a sharper feeling began to form. Not anger, not yet, resolve. By morning, the hollow ache in my chest had settled into something steadier. I made coffee in Claire's tiny kitchen, the kind of dark roast that smelled almost burnt, but woke you up, whether you wanted it or not. Claire shuffled in wearing her robe and glasses, looking me over with that sharp nurse's gaze she never lost. "You didn't sleep?" she said. "No," I admitted. "But I know what I need to do." Her eyebrow arched. "Which is call Zoe." Claire nodded slowly. "Good. That girl's got more spine than both her parents combined." She was right. Zoe had always been different. Lucas's daughter from his first marriage, quiet, but bold in her own way. She never played along with Marissa's polite cruelty, never pretended to like the staged family dinners where everything felt like a performance. I dialed her number, half expecting it to go to voicemail like the others, but she picked up on the first ring. "Grandma, is everything okay?" Her voice was soft but alert. She always seemed to know when something was off. "No," I said honestly. "Can I come over?" She didn't hesitate. "Yes, right now. I'll put on coffee." When I arrived at her apartment, Zoe was already at the door, hair pulled back, messily paint streaks on her hoodie. Her little cat wove between her ankles as she hugged me without saying a word. Inside her place was small but warm, cluttered with canvases and books stacked on the floor. It smelled faintly of coffee grounds and acrylic paint. She handed me a mug and sat across from me on the beanbag chair she used instead of a couch. "What happened?" she asked gently. I told her everything. The door, the texts, the bank call. I tried to keep my voice steady, but it cracked when I said our space. Zoe's expression hardened in a way I'd never seen before. "They changed the code on you?" "Yes." She exhaled sharply. I knew something was coming. Last week, Dad told me not to drop by unannounced. Said Marissa needed privacy. I thought it was just them being their usual selves. But now... She shook her head. No, this is worse. I sipped the coffee, letting the warmth steady my hands. I don't even know where to start. You start by taking back control, Zoe said. Her voice was calm, but firm. They're counting on you to stay quiet. I looked at her, startled. She reminded me so much of her mother in that moment, Lucas's first wife, the one who'd left, because she refused to let his selfishness swallow her whole. Do you still have the contact info for James Patel? She asked suddenly. I blinked. James. My old patient. Yeah, he's a lawyer now. Property and estate stuff. He gave me his card once when I told him you were my grandma. Zoe rummaged through a drawer and pulled out a slightly wrinkled business card. James Patel and Clark, LLP. I stared at it for a moment. I remembered James, a quiet man with kind eyes who'd spent 6 weeks in the cardiac unit where I worked. He always thanked me for the extra time I spent sitting with him when his family didn't visit. Call him, Zoe said. I nodded slowly. The line rang twice before a familiar voice answered. James Patel speaking. James, it's Evelyn Hart from St. Mary's Hospital, years ago. There was a pause, then warmth flooded his tone. Mrs. Hart, I remember you. You practically kept me alive. How are you? I hesitated. I've been better. I think I need your help. He didn't hesitate. Tell me everything. So I did. The lock, the bank, the POA I'd signed after surgery that Lucas had turned into a weapon. When I finished, James's voice was calm but precise. We can fix this. First, we'll revoke the POA immediately. I'll draft it today. Then we freeze all joint accounts, trace every unauthorized expense, and notify the bank in writing. We'll build from there. Will it get ugly? I asked quietly. He paused. It already is ugly. We're just taking the power back. When I hung up, I felt something shift inside me. For the first time in days, I didn't feel small. Zoe sat forward. So what did he say? That it's fixable? I said softly. But I have to act now. She smiled faintly. Good. Because I overheard Dad and Marissa talking last month. They're planning to sell the house. Said they'd convince you it's better to move into assisted living. My chest tightened. They said that, yes. They were laughing about how much the market would fetch. Marissa called it her fresh start fund. The anger that rose in me then wasn't loud. It was quiet, heavy, like a slow burn. I looked around Zoe's little apartment. There was more life in her mismatched furniture and chipped coffee mugs than in that whole house with Marissa's sterile decorations. They think you'll do nothing, Zoe said softly. They think you'll just let them erase you, because you always do. I met her gaze. They're wrong. By late afternoon, James had already emailed the revocation documents. Zoe helped me print them at the campus library. I signed each page with a steady hand. We sent certified notices to the bank, the county recorder's office, and Lucas's email. It was a small step, but it felt monumental. That night, Zoe cooked pasta in her tiny kitchen, and we sat on the floor with her cat weaving between us. What now? She asked. Now I said we let them wonder what I'm doing, because silence works both ways. 2 days later, I walked up the driveway with a folder in my hand. The morning air was sharp and still. I didn't text, didn't call ahead. I wanted them unprepared. The house looked the same, neatly trimmed lawn, my flower beds slightly overrun, but still blooming. From the outside, you'd think it was a home. Inside, I imagined it had already been stripped of me. I pressed the doorbell. No answer. I pressed again. Waited. The door swung open suddenly, and there stood Marissa, hair pinned back in a perfect twist robe, tied just a little too tightly, like she was holding herself together by sheer force. She looked at me with that half smile that never reached her eyes. "Oh, Evelyn, you should have called." I met her gaze evenly. "I didn't come for a visit. I came for a conversation." Her smile faltered just a fraction. "Now's not a good time." "Neither was Tuesday," I said. "Or Thursday." She crossed her arms. "You're being dramatic." I reached into my purse slowly and pulled out the folder. "This isn't drama. It's a legal notice." She blinked. "Excuse me. This is a revocation of power of attorney effective immediately. It also includes documentation of the unauthorized charges on my accounts which your names are attached to. I'd recommend Lucas reads it carefully." Marissa's hand tightened on the doorknob. She tried to laugh, but it came out brittle. "What are you even trying to prove? You want the house back? Fine. Take it. But you'll be alone again." I stared at her calm. "I've been alone since you moved in. I just didn't admit it." Her lips pressed together in a thin line. She didn't step aside. She didn't slam the door either. I turned and walked down the steps, my back straight, every movement deliberate. She didn't call after me. When I got back to Zoe's apartment, my phone buzzed. A voicemail from Lucas. His voice was a mess of false calm and rising panic. "Mum, I don't know what you're doing, but this is unnecessary. You're making it worse than it is. We were just trying to... We'll talk? Please call me." I didn't call back. Instead, I forwarded the voicemail to James Patel. 2 days later, we sat in a mediation room. Beige walls, beige carpet, a fake plant in the corner. The kind of room designed to make people behave. Lucas sat across from me, looking older than he had just a month ago, but still with that same restless energy in his knee, bouncing like he couldn't sit still. Marissa sat next to him, flipping through her phone like the whole thing was beneath her. On my side of the table, James was calm, collected a quiet anchor. The mediator, a man named Grant, with square glasses, and a voice that sounded practiced in patience, began with a neutral summary. "We're here regarding the disputed management of Evelyn Hart's property and finances. There are questions of consent, verbal agreements, and potential misuse of accounts." Lucas cleared his throat. "Look, we didn't... This is all a misunderstanding. Mum signed the deed transfer last year. She knew we were just trying to help with the upkeep. She said she didn't want to deal with the stress anymore." I watched him closely. He wasn't even lying well. James leaned forward, his tone crisp. "Mrs. Hart signed a revocable deed for ease of management during her recovery from surgery. There was an explicit verbal understanding she would retain full residence and access. That agreement was violated when the lock code was changed and her bank accounts were accessed for non-essential expenditures." Marissa finally looked up. "Non-essential." "We paid for groceries. We maintained the house." James slid a folder across the table. "This includes charges to a luxury wine subscription, a personal trainer for your dog, and a $1,400 spa package under your name, Mrs. Hart. All from Evelyn's account." Marissa's face froze. Grant cleared his throat. "Let's keep this professional." I spoke then, my voice steady. "I didn't give you permission to do any of that. And I didn't give you permission to shut me out of my own home." Lucas shifted uncomfortably. "We just needed time." "You weren't supposed to time for what I interrupted softly. To sell the house, to move me into assisted living so you could take the money." He went pale. "Who told you that, your daughter?" I said simply. For a moment, the room was silent. I saw it then, the crack in his composure, the shame flickering behind his eyes. Grant glanced between us. "Mr. Hart, this situation is serious. At this point, a court could view this as undue influence bordering on financial abuse." It would be in your best interest to reach an agreement now. Marissa spoke up, her voice sharp. So what, she wants the house? Fine. Take it. We'll leave. Lucas turned to her, startled. Marissa. But she was already gathering her things. I'm not dragging this out. James looked at me, waiting for my cue. I nodded once. We want full title reinstated, retroactive to the original date of transfer, all accounts restored, and they vacate the property within 10 days. Lucas's voice cracked. Mum? Please? Don't do this? I met his eyes. You already did. Grant made a note. We'll document this as a voluntary agreement. It was over in less than an hour. Outside the building, Lucas caught up with me. He looked small somehow, like the boy he used to be, holding out a crumpled drawing and asking me to stick it on the fridge. Are you really going to take this all the way? He asked quietly. I turned to face him. I already have. He didn't follow me to the car. When I got back to Zoe's apartment, she was waiting with 2 mugs of tea. She didn't ask how it went. She just looked at me, saw the answer on my face, and smiled faintly. They didn't see it coming, did they? She said. No, I replied. They never think the quiet ones will fight back. They were gone within 8 days. I didn't go to the house while they packed. James advised it was cleaner that way, no arguments, no theatrics. But I heard from Zoe, who drove by once, that Marissa barked orders into her phone while movers shuffled boxes into a rental truck. Lucas just stood on the porch, staring at the yard, like he was realizing too late what he'd lost. When it was done, they left a single black trash bag at the curb. Zoe said it looked heavy, but half empty, like the end of something that had never really belonged to them. The bank restored my accounts. Not everything was recoverable, but most of it was enough to remind me that while money can be stolen, dignity is harder to erase when you decide you're done being silent. 3 days later, a voicemail from Lucas arrived. His voice was strained, quieter than I'd ever heard it. Mum, I don't know what to say. I messed up. I was scared. Okay, I lost my job and Marissa kept talking about how we could finally start over if we just managed things better. I thought I was protecting you. I thought you didn't want to deal with the house anymore. I didn't think you'd... The message cut off there. I didn't listen again. Instead, I sat at Claire's kitchen table with a pen and a fresh set of documents. James slid them toward me one by one, explaining each in his steady tone. A new will, a living trust, and a clause that left the house not to Lucas, but to Zoe, though not outright ownership. It would remain in a lifetime trust with strict conditions. It couldn't be sold, borrowed against, or used by anyone who didn't respect it. When James asked, "Are you sure about this?" I didn't hesitate. Yes, I want her to have it, but I want her to have it safe. He nodded. And Lucas excluded, I said simply. No claims. Not now. Not ever. It didn't feel vengeful. Just final. Later, Zoe and I sat together on her little couch, the papers in a neat stack between us. She traced the edge of the folder with her finger. "You're sure you trust me with all this?" she asked softly. "I trust you not to need it," I said. Her eyes filled just a little. She nodded without saying more. The following morning, I drove back to the house. It was quiet, hollow. Most of the furniture was gone. Marissa's gauzy curtains had been taken down, leaving the windows bare. The living room smelled faintly of cleaner, but underneath was still my house, the faint scent of wood polish and old summers. I walked slowly through each room. The crack in the kitchen floor was still there, the one James tried to fix years ago, but never could. For the first time, I smiled at it. It felt like proof that not everything can be erased, no matter how hard someone tries. In the garage, I found a box labeled junk. Inside were a few framed family photos, a chipped mug Zoe made in 3rd grade, and the scarf I'd knitted for Marissa one Christmas. I didn't feel hurt. I just felt done. Zoe helped me carry out what mattered: a cedar chest of letters, my journals, a handful of keepsakes. Everything else I let go. That afternoon, the neighbours started peeking out. Mrs. Hanley from across the street came over with a tin of muffins. She didn't ask questions, just said, "Good to see your curtains again." I thanked her. Back inside, I stood in the centre of the living room listening to the silence. It was different now. Not heavy or hostile. Just waiting. For the first time in weeks, I let myself breathe deeply. Lucas hadn't called again. Marissa certainly wouldn't. But I didn't need them to. I wasn't reclaiming this house for revenge. I was reclaiming it because it was mine, not just the walls, but the life I built within them. That evening, I signed the final version of the trust documents. The house would never again be a bargaining chip. It would stay in the family, but only through the ones who remembered what family actually meant. And Lucas, I didn't erase him from my history, but I erased him from my future. It took 2 days to make the house feel like mine again. Zoe came early the first morning with paper bags full of groceries and a little speaker that played soft music while we cleaned. We opened every window, letting the stale air drift out. Dust floated in slants of sunlight, catching on the floor like tiny ghosts leaving. The living room was mostly empty now. The recliner Marissa bought was gone. So were the sterile throw pillows she insisted brightened the space. But somehow the absence felt like a blessing. The walls looked bare, but honest. We scrubbed the kitchen counters until they gleamed. Zoe mopped the cracked linoleum while I wiped down cabinets I hadn't touched in months. I paused at the floor crack, crouching for a moment. My fingers traced the jagged line, the one James always promised to fix, but never quite managed. "Should we patch it?" Zoe asked gently, standing over me with the mop. I shook my head, a small smile tugging at my lips. "No, it stays. It's proof this place lived through something, and so did I." Zoe smiled faintly, and for a second I could see her as a little girl again, sitting on this very floor, eating peanut butter sandwiches, while Lucas worked late shifts. We found little remnants of them as we worked an abandoned dog toy under the couch, a forgotten charger in the bedroom, a single bottle of Marissa's overpriced perfume on the bathroom shelf. Zoe gathered them into a cardboard box without asking what I wanted to do. I didn't even glance at it. "Let the trash have it," I said quietly. By late afternoon, the house was brighter. Not from new decorations or rearrangements, but from something simpler: airspace, the absence of their heaviness. That evening, Zoe cooked a simple dinner, and we sat on the floor with our plates because the chairs hadn't arrived yet. We laughed over burnt garlic bread and swapped small stories. She told me about a painting she was working on, a doorway surrounded by colours that clashed, but somehow worked. I told her about how her grandfather used to hum when he worked on the porch. It wasn't dramatic. It was just peaceful. After she went to bed in the guest room, the same room I'd cleared for Lucas and Marissa, months ago, I stayed up alone in the living room. The house felt still, but not lonely. I walked to the cedar chest in the corner and opened it. Inside were my journals, old letters, pieces of a life that could have been thrown away, but weren't. I pulled out one notebook, the one I'd started years ago, where I wrote the things I never said aloud. Pages about silence, about guilt, about the quiet ways women are erased if they're not careful. I turned to a blank page and wrote, "Today, I opened my own door again." It was heavier than I remembered, but it still opened. And that's enough for now. I closed the notebook and slid it back inside. The next morning, the garden called to me. It was overgrown in patches, the marigolds struggling but still standing. I knelt down with Zoe's old gardening gloves and began pulling weeds by hand. The soil was dry but familiar. I planted two new rosemary bushes and a small tomato vine, thinking of how James and I used to joke that the garden always grew better when we didn't overthink it. My knees ached, but it was the good kind of ache, the kind that comes from doing something that matters. When I looked up, Zoe was leaning in the doorway, a mug of tea in her hands. "You're really going to fix it all yourself?" she asked, half smiling. I brushed dirt from my gloves. "Not all at once. Just one thing at a time. The rest will follow." She nodded, like she understood more than she let on. Later that afternoon, the mail came. Tucked between a water bill and a flyer for lawn care was an envelope with Lucas's handwriting. I stood at the kitchen counter just looking at it for a moment. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. Some words come too late to matter. Instead, I sat down and wrote something of my own. A letter not to Lucas, but to myself. "Dear Evelyn, you gave too much for too long. You mistook patience for love, silence for peace. You let others take pieces of you because it felt easier than holding them back. But today, you remembered something: a locked door doesn't define you. The key was always in your own hands." I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the cedar chest. That night, Zoe and I sat on the porch together, the same porch Lucas once played on as a boy. The air smelled faintly of soil and rosemary. She sipped her tea and watched the street in silence. "Do you think they'll ever come back?" she asked softly. I thought about it. Maybe, but I don't need them to. She glanced at me. "Does it hurt?" "Yes," I said honestly, but not the way it did before. It's quieter now. It feels more like a scar than a wound. She nodded slowly. "You know, you didn't just take the house back. You took yourself back." I smiled faintly. I suppose I did. We stayed out there until the sky turned a deep indigo, the streetlights flickering on one by one. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a guest in my own life. Sometimes the deepest betrayals don't come from strangers. They come quietly from the people you've loved and trusted the most. This story isn't just about a house or a legal battle. It's about remembering that silence can be mistaken for consent, and kindness can be exploited when it's not protected by boundaries. It's about realizing that family doesn't always mean loyalty, and that love without respect can become a leash. But most importantly, it's about reclaiming your worth when others have tried to diminish it. Evelyn didn't fight back to punish anyone. She fought back to remind herself she still mattered, that her life still belonged to her. And in doing so, she showed that dignity isn't something someone else can give you. It's a door you lock from the inside. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever experienced a moment where you had to stand up quietly but firmly for your own worth? Share your reflections in the comments. I read every single one. If you believe in stories that shine a light on resilience, justice, and self-respect, hit that like button to show your support and subscribe so you don't miss more true-to-life, thought-provoking stories like this one. Thank you for watching, and may you always find peace in knowing your value, no matter who tries to make you forget.